Not everything that disappears is lost. Some things must vanish so that truth can finally appear. We spend years clinging to people, habits, identities, and illusions that were never truly ours, thinking that losing them means losing ourselves. But disappearance is not destruction. It is purification. It strips away the noise, the constant grasping for validation, the endless search for something to fill the emptiness. The moment something or someone disappears from your life, what's really being taken from you is the illusion of control. You thought you were holding it together, but in truth, it was holding you captive. You thought you were choosing, but you were merely reacting. You thought you were loving, but you were attached to the feeling of being needed. The silence that follows loss is not emptiness, it is space, the kind of space where you can finally see yourself without the distortions that others projected onto you. Have you noticed how people panic when something ends? How quickly they run to fill the void? They call it moving on, but it's often just distraction. Because facing the void feels like death. But only through that psychological death can you be reborn into something stronger, not emotionally dependent, not desperate for recognition, not defined by the presence of what once was. You start to understand that loss is not punishment, it's clarity disguised as pain. The human mind resists disappearance because it craves continuity. It fears endings. It wants everything labeled, archived, explained. But power begins when you stop demanding explanations from the universe. When you accept that not everything that fades away has failed, some things fade because their purpose was to awaken you. There are people who were never meant to stay, but to shake something dormant inside you. There are experiences that were not meant to comfort you, but to strip away your illusions. Disappearance becomes sacred when you stop viewing it as theft and start recognizing it as refinement. What disappears takes with it a part of you that was not meant to survive the next stage of your evolution. Sometimes the universe hides your desires not to punish you, but to protect you from your own immaturity. When someone leaves you, it's rarely about them. It's about what their absence forces you to confront, the silence that reveals who you are without the echo of someone else's attention. Do you know why silence feels unbearable after something disappears? Because silence doesn't lie. It reflects your dependence back to you. The more uncomfortable the silence, the more addicted you were to the noise. That is why detachment is misunderstood. It's not indifference, it's the strength to remain still while everything unstable falls apart. When you stop chasing what's leaving, you start aligning with what's real. There's a strange peace in letting the tide take what no longer belongs to your shore. The ego calls it loss, but the soul calls it order. To live with power is to stop collecting and start cleansing. You begin to measure your strength not by what you can hold, but by what you can release. What disappears often returns in another form, purified, elevated, aligned with your new level of awareness, or it doesn't return at all because its purpose was already fulfilled. Either way, nothing is truly lost. Even endings carry information. Even silence speaks, even absence instructs. The most powerful realizations of your life will come not when everything is present, but when everything is gone. When you're standing alone with nothing to distract you from yourself, and yet you realize, Mima, you are still whole. That is the paradox of power. You lose everything you thought mattered, and in that emptiness, you discover that you never needed it to be complete. Most people never reach that understanding because they mistake disappearance for failure. They panic when someone ghosts them, when a career ends, when a phase closes. They interpret the natural rhythm of life as rejection. But the ones who grow, the ones who become unshakable, are those who treat disappearance as dialogue, a coded message between your old self and your higher one. The old self screams for comfort, the higher one whispers for detachment. Which one do you listen to? The moment you stop resisting loss, it transforms from enemy to teacher. It shows you where your power was leaking, where you were investing in illusions. Every disappearance reveals an imbalance. If you truly observe it, you will see that what disappeared was never truly stable. People who vanish were already emotionally gone long before they physically left. Opportunities that fade were already misaligned before you realized it. The universe removes what no longer matches your frequency, but it does so silently, without your permission, because your conscious mind is too attached to patterns that feel familiar. Familiarity is comfortable, but it's rarely growth. You must learn to bless the vanishing, to understand that when something leaves, it leaves behind a vacuum, and that vacuum is power waiting to be reclaimed. The question is, will you fill it with noise again, or will you sit in silence until it transforms you? Most people rush to fill the silence because it mirrors their fear of insignificance. They equate stillness with invisibility, forgetting that the most powerful forces in the world, gravity, time, energy, operate unseen. When something disappears, it may not be gone. It may simply be operating on a level you can't yet perceive. The same applies to you. There will be seasons when you must disappear, not as escape, but as evolution. When the world cannot yet recognize your next form, you must go silent and unseen. People will think you are lost, but you are merely reconfiguring. Real transformation happens in absence, not in applause, not in attention, but in the invisible rebuilding of self. You withdraw not to avoid life, but to refine your strength in private. That is why many powerful people are misunderstood. They vanish when everyone else is performing. They appear detached, but their detachment is focus. They disappear from the crowd to re-emerge with clarity. In a world obsessed with visibility, disappearance becomes rebellion. To step back from the noise is to reclaim control over what shapes you. Because when you are constantly visible, you are constantly influenced. You begin to perform instead of evolve. You start living to be seen rather than to become. Disappearance breaks that addiction. It reminds you that your worth is not dependent on being observed. When you understand this, you stop fearing absence, yours or someone else's. You start to see the hidden architecture behind loss. The people who left were never the structure. They were scaffolding. They helped you build something inside yourself, but they were never meant to stay. Once the structure stands on its own, the scaffolding must go. It looks like abandonment, but it's progress. The real tragedy is when people chase the scaffolding instead of building the structure. They cling to what helped them grow instead of continuing to grow. The art of power is knowing when to let go with grace, because every disappearance you accept strengthens your foundation. Every silence you endure expands your self-command. Every detachment you practice elevates your awareness. You stop bleeding energy into things that no longer feed your evolution. You start moving from reaction to response, from desperation to direction. You stop demanding closure from people who were never capable of giving it, and instead, you give closure to yourself, not through explanation, but through understanding. This is what it means to mature emotionally, to understand that not everything unresolved needs resolution. Some things are meant to stay open, because the lesson is in the tension. To the untrained mind, disappearance feels like punishment. To the wise, it feels like promotion. Because what is gone externally makes room for what is rising internally. You cannot ascend while carrying the weight of outdated attachments. When the universe removes something, it's not cruelty, it's calibration. It's aligning you with something more suitable to your next chapter. But that alignment requires faith, not blind optimism, but disciplined trust. The kind of trust that says, even if I don't understand it now, I will not collapse. Because power is not in understanding everything, it's in standing firm when nothing makes sense. You must learn to look at disappearance without begging for meaning. Meaning will reveal itself later. For now your task is to remain still enough to see the pattern behind the pain. When you stop running from the void becomes your teacher. It whispers, not everything that disappears is lost. Some things disappear because they have completed their purpose. Some things disappear to test your strength. Some things disappear to return differently. And some things disappear because you are finally ready to exist without them. The human mind has an instinctive fear of disappearance because it equates visibility with existence. If something is seen, it feels real. If it vanishes, it feels dead. Yet reality doesn't work that way. What disappears often continues just in another realm, beyond your immediate perception, beyond the reach of your current awareness. Think of a relationship that ends. You don't stop feeling its impact the moment the person leaves. The energy persists. The lessons linger. The imprint remains. You're haunted not by their absence, but by the echo of what they represented in your evolution. Sometimes what disappears is not the person, but the version of yourself that existed with them. And that's why it hurts. Not because they're gone, but because their departure buries an old identity you were not yet ready to release. In that moment, you meet your real self, the one who lives beneath the noise of attachment. That's when the silence becomes uncomfortable, because in silence there's no performance, no validation, no feedback loop to tell you who you are. You must define yourself again, without the mirrors that others provided. Most people can't handle that confrontation. They rush to fill the silence with new distractions, new people, new goals, all to avoid hearing their own emptiness speak. But power lies in listening to that emptiness without running. When something disappears, it gives you a rare opportunity to see what remains when nothing else is there. That remainder is your truth. That remainder is your foundation. Everything else is decoration. If your peace depends on someone's presence, it was never peace. It was dependency disguised as love. If your confidence collapses when validation stops, it was never confidence. It was approval addiction dressed as self-esteem. What disappears exposes what was never stable. The pain you feel is the friction between illusion and truth. Once the illusion is gone, the truth feels harsh at first, but then liberating. There's a strange beauty in realizing that the things you feared losing were never truly yours to begin with. You borrowed them for a chapter, and when the chapter ended, life asked for them back. Resistance to that natural rhythm is what creates suffering. Acceptance of it is what builds mastery. Because power is not the ability to keep, it's the ability to continue, to stay composed even when continuity breaks. You start to see that every disappearance is choreography. The universe rearranges your environment to match your next level. It removes what would limit your expansion, even when you still crave it. That's why detachment isn't coldness, it's alignment. When you detach, you allow life to circulate again. You let go of the stagnation that attachment creates. Energy that clings can't evolve. The more you hold on, the more life resists you. The more you release, the more it flows toward what's truly meant for you. That's the paradox of loss. The more you trust disappearance, the more you receive what actually belongs to you. Do you remember the times when something left your life and you thought it was over, only to realize later that it freed you for something greater? That's the pattern. You can't receive while clinging. You can't see new horizons while staring at closed doors. You can't discover your higher self while worshipping your former one. The real power lies in the calm acceptance of endings, not the bitter resignation of defeat, but the quiet awareness that you are being refined. To the emotional mind, this feels cruel. To the awakened mind, it feels divine, because the universe is not sentimental. It is precise. It removes not what you want, but what you've outgrown. Growth requires subtraction, but subtraction is disguised as disappearance, and that's why people misinterpret it as loss. They think life is taking something away, but it's actually clearing the debris that blocks expansion. The silence that follows is uncomfortable only if you don't yet trust yourself to fill it with meaning. But when you've built inner depth, silence becomes your ally. It becomes your fortress. You begin to move differently, slower, calmer, with more intention. You don't chase what leaves. You observe it. You learn from it. You bless it. That's composure. That's control. There's a profound difference between losing and letting go. Losing happens to the weak. Letting go is chosen by the strong. When you lose, you feel diminished. When you let go, you feel cleansed. The external event might look identical, but the inner posture changes everything. The weak mourn disappearance. The strong master it. They understand that power grows in invisibility. They withdraw not because they're defeated, but because they're cultivating. You don't see the roots while the tree grows, but that doesn't mean nothing's happening. What's invisible often sustains what's visible. The same applies to your evolution. What disappears externally is often the external manifestation of an internal upgrade. When you stop needing constant confirmation, you start operating from inner authority. People will sense the difference and they'll feel your energy shift. They'll say you've changed, become distant, detached. But in truth, you've simply become less dependent. You've stopped begging the world to tell you who you are. That's when real magnetism begins. Not when you chase, but when you withdraw. Not when you explain, but when you embody. The quiet ones carry power because they no longer fear absence. They know that what's meant to stay will stay, and what leaves was never solid enough to remain. That kind of faith isn't naive, it's built through pain. Pain is the tuition for wisdom. Every loss you've survived has educated your soul. Every disappearance has trained your instincts. You start to read silence differently. You start to sense endings before they happen, not because you're cynical, but because you're attuned. You can feel when energy shifts, when someone's presence starts to fade, when an opportunity begins to decay. Instead of clinging, you prepare. Instead of begging, you observe. You let the inevitable unfold. That composure confuses people because the world worships reaction. But power is the opposite of reaction. It's restraint. It's the ability to witness disappearance without losing your center. Once you master that, nothing can truly destabilize you. You stop living in fear of endings because you understand that every ending hides a beginning. Every disappearance carries information about what must come next. The more you resist it, the longer you delay your evolution. The moment you surrender to it, life accelerates. You move lighter. You stop trying to resurrect what's already completed. You begin to trust timing instead of manipulating outcomes. That's when people start to see you differently, calm, unreadable, sovereign. You stop being part of the collective anxiety that chases closure and start embodying the rare calm of someone who doesn't need it. That's power, not dominance over others, but dominion over self. To reach it, you must learn to let disappearances happen without attaching stories to them. The stories are what trap you. The event itself is neutral. It's your interpretation that makes it painful. The mind says, "They left, so I wasn't enough." The soul says, "They left because my path requires solitude now." The mind says, "I lost everything." The soul says, "I'm being refined." The more you align with the soul's interpretation, the less suffering you experience. You realize that nothing truly disappears. It only changes form. People leave, but their lessons remain. Opportunities vanish, but their wisdom endures. Love fades, but its awakening stays within you. Even death itself, when observed through this lens, is transformation, not annihilation. That's the deeper layer of this truth. Disappearance is not destruction. It's evolution in disguise, but only the still mind can perceive it. The restless mind sees only chaos. That's why silence is a weapon. It sharpens perception. It allows you to see what others overlook, that disappearance is order operating in the shadows. When you accept that, you stop fighting life. You stop trying to resurrect the dead. You stop clinging to what no longer breathes. You start focusing on what's still alive, your growth, your awareness, your discipline. Every time something disappears, you have two choices: to mourn it endlessly or to mine it for meaning. Only one of those leads to strength. Only one builds composure. You decide whether disappearance breaks you or builds you. But here's the secret. It was never about what left. It was always about what remained. And what remains after everything has vanished. That's your essence, unfiltered, unmasked, unafraid. That is the self that doesn't depend on external presence to feel alive. That is the version of you that is finally free. There comes a moment in every person's evolution when disappearance is no longer terrifying. It becomes sacred. You stop pleading for things to stay. You stop fighting against what's fading. You begin to understand that every vanishing is a subtle negotiation between you and the universe, one that's meant to free your energy from what has completed its purpose. What disappears does not betray you. It graduates you. It takes from you the comfort that numbed your growth. It takes from you the distractions that disguised your fear. It takes from you the illusions that kept you dependent on validation. And when the silence that follows feels unbearable, that's when you realize how much noise you had mistaken for meaning. You start to feel the pull of something quieter, something deeper, the presence of your own awareness. You begin to see that what remains after everything disappears is not emptiness, but potential. Potential waiting to be directed. Power waiting to be claimed. Every disappearance, no matter how painful, refines your focus. It removes the unnecessary so the essential can emerge. And yet, we resist. We mourn. We call it loss. But ask yourself, how much of what you've lost was truly aligned with who you are now? How many of those things were built on outdated versions of yourself? You are not who you were when you first met those people, chased those dreams, or held those desires. You've outgrown them, but your mind still clings to the emotional memory. That's why disappearance hurts. It's not the event that breaks you. It's your attachment to an identity that no longer exists. Real freedom begins when you stop demanding permanence from things that were designed to be temporary. Life moves in cycles, not straight lines. Everything you touch will eventually transform. Some through growth, others through disappearance. And that's not tragedy. That's design. The wise don't chase permanence, they cultivate presence. They don't mourn what leaves, they bless it for teaching them impermanence. They understand that clinging to the visible delays the invisible process of transformation. The stronger your grip, the more painful your evolution. That's why the universe often uses disappearance as a language of mercy. It removes what you refuse to release. It ends what your courage hasn't yet faced. It silences what you keep feeding even though it's already dead. When you begin to see this, disappearance stops feeling personal. You no longer see it as rejection. You see it as correction. Life doesn't take from you arbitrarily. It reconfigures your path to align with a higher pattern. That pattern only reveals itself when you stop demanding immediate comfort and start observing the long arc of cause and effect. Every painful ending you've survived fits somewhere in the architecture of your becoming. The more perspective you gain, the more gratitude replaces grief. Gratitude for the silence that forced you to listen inward. Gratitude for the absence that made you resourceful. Gratitude for the emptiness that turned into strength. Because what disappears externally always reappears internally in the form of growth. You lose the relationship, but you gain discernment. You lose the opportunity, but you gain direction. You lose the illusion, but you gain depth. That's the secret equation of power. You never truly lose. You only exchange forms of energy. And the more consciously you do it, the less you suffer. When you stop chasing what's fading, you start magnetizing what's meant for you. Detachment doesn't repel life, it clarifies it. It filters the noise. It teaches you to wait with dignity instead of reacting with desperation. Most people can't handle waiting because waiting feels like invisibility, and invisibility feels like insignificance. But here's what they don't understand. Invisibility is incubation. It's where strength accumulates quietly, out of view. The most powerful transformations happen in silence, away from the gaze of others. When a person disappears into solitude, the world assumes they've lost momentum. But in truth, they're multiplying it. They're refining their energy so that when they return, they do so with precision. This is why you must never fear your own disappearance. There are seasons when retreat is not weakness, but wisdom. When solitude is not loneliness, but recalibration. When silence is not punishment, but preparation. The world trains you to equate absence with failure, but every master knows the opposite is true. The strongest disappear before they rise. They vanish to study, to observe, to detach from the collective hysteria that consumes the weak. They understand that if you are always visible, you are always vulnerable. Visibility exposes you to influence. Disappearance protects your focus. That's why those who constantly seek attention rarely evolve. Their energy is scattered, dependent, reactive. But those who can vanish deliberately possess a power that feels unshakable. They no longer chase being seen, they build being felt. And that presence, when they return, carries more gravity than constant noise ever could. What disappears is not lost. It's transforming, maturing, condensing into something denser, quieter, more potent. The same applies to you. When your path seems unclear, when opportunities vanish, when people fade, it's not the end, it's condensation. The scattered fragments of your attention are being pulled inward, forced to merge into something unified. That process feels like loss because you are used to equating expansion with accumulation. But real expansion often begins with contraction, with pulling energy back into yourself. It's the same process the universe follows. Stars collapse before they explode into new light. Disappearance, therefore, is a cosmic principle, a preparation for re-emergence. When you truly grasp that, fear dissolves. You stop mourning what's gone and start preparing for what's forming. You realize that endings don't happen to you, they happen for you. Every disappearance is a test of trust. Can you stay composed in uncertainty? Can you remain faithful to your direction when the map fades? Can you hold the tension of not knowing without filling it with noise? Most can't. They rush back to distraction because stillness reveals how dependent they are on the external. But those who can hold the silence become dangerous in the best way. Their calm unsettles the frantic. Their patience intimidates the impulsive. Their absence speaks louder than other people's presence. That's the kind of power disappearance gives you. The ability to affect without effort, to influence without visibility, to exist without explanation. And once you've tasted that, you never crave attention again. Because attention, compared to presence, feels cheap. The world has too many loud people and too few powerful ones. The difference is simple. The loud try to prove, the powerful simply are. You reach that state by allowing disappearances to sculpt you instead of scare you. Each one chisels away the unnecessary. Each silence carves a deeper layer of composure. Each ending teaches detachment. Eventually, you stop chasing what leaves because you've learned to recognize what's meant to remain. And what remains after all the noise, the chaos, the illusions, that's your essence, the part of you that doesn't depend on being seen, loved, or understood to feel real. The part that exists quietly, sovereignly, beyond validation. The more you live from that center, the less you fear disappearance because you become it. You become the one who moves in silence, who vanishes strategically, who understands that not every withdrawal is loss, but often a declaration of power. That's when you finally understand the paradox. The more you disappear from what drains you, the more you appear to yourself. The more you let go of what's gone, the more you attract what endures. The more you release, the more you rise. Disappearance is not the end, it's initiation. The most profound truth about disappearance is that it's never random, it's rhythmic. It's the way life balances the unseen with the seen. It removes, then reveals, it hides, then restores, it breaks, then rebuilds. Every cycle of disappearance is a silent conversation between what is temporary and what is eternal. Yet the untrained mind sees only the first half of the equation, the taking away, the loss, the absence, and calls it tragedy. But if you watch closely, if you develop the discipline to observe the full arc of time, you begin to see the return. Not the same form, not the same face, but the same essence reappearing in a new dimension of your life. You realize that what vanished was never wasted, that love you lost becomes wisdom, that betrayal becomes intuition, that isolation becomes self-mastery, that silence becomes strength. Life is economical. It never wastes pain. It recycles it into purpose. But you only see that if you resist the urge to fill every void too quickly. The world rushes to replace, to refill, to distract, because most people cannot tolerate uncertainty. They believe if something is missing, something must be wrong. But absence is not always an error. Sometimes it's precision. It's life subtracting the unnecessary so you can encounter yourself undiluted. Think about it. How much of who you've become emerged not from what you gained, but from what you lost? You grew not when things went your way, but when they disappeared. You learned presence through absence, patience through silence, power through solitude. Disappearance forces a kind of intimacy with reality that comfort never can. It strips you of the illusion that control equals security. It humbles the ego, reminding you that not everything obeys your will. And that's a gift. Because power built on control is fragile, but power built on acceptance is eternal. You stop measuring life by what stays and start measuring it by what it refines. That's when you begin to live in rhythm with reality. You stop forcing permanence onto what's meant to move. You start trusting timing instead of manipulating it. You understand that what's meant for you cannot vanish permanently, because resonance always returns. The law of resonance governs everything: people, energy, opportunities. When something leaves, if it's still aligned with your frequency, it will circle back. If it doesn't, it was never truly resonant. That truth alone can free you from years of unnecessary suffering. It teaches you that closure isn't always a conversation. Sometimes it's the silence that never breaks. And that's enough. You no longer need explanations to heal. You simply trust that disappearance is data, proof that an energy mismatch occurred. The more you honor that data, the faster you evolve. The problem is that most people ignore it. They chase after what left instead of decoding why it left. They call it loyalty, but it's really attachment disguised as virtue. Loyalty without discernment becomes self-betrayal. You start sacrificing your peace just to maintain appearances. You start fighting to preserve what's already dissolving. But what disappears on its own was never truly stable, and trying to revive it only drains your energy. The mature soul learns to watch disappearance with reverence, not resistance. To understand that when something falls away effortlessly, it's an act of grace. It's life saying, "This no longer belongs to your story." When you internalize that truth, your emotional reactions transform into quiet observation. You begin to sense patterns before they manifest. You stop begging for permanence because you see how impermanence serves you. You even start to disappear by choice, from arguments, from noise, from validation, from the constant exposure that weakens inner strength. You become selective with your presence. You give your energy strategically. You let absence speak for you. Because there's a form of influence that doesn't require interaction. It requires restraint. Disappearance becomes communication. Your silence begins to teach others how to value your presence. And the more you practice this, the more magnetic you become. People are drawn to what they can't easily access. They crave what doesn't beg to be seen. That's why the ones who master disappearance never chase attention. They command it by their absence. The world may forget your noise, but it never forgets your silence. This is the hidden geometry of power. You withdraw not to vanish, but to amplify. Every disappearance condenses your energy, making your next appearance impossible to ignore. That's the real secret behind mystery. It's not manipulation, it's energy management. It's the discipline of being seen only when it serves your evolution. You start to view your own visibility as a resource, not a reflex. You no longer feel the need to explain your silence because you understand that silence is self-explanation. It says, "I have nothing to prove." It says, "I am at peace with being misunderstood." It says, "I trust the timing of my reappearance." Most people won't understand this. They'll call it cold, distant, detached. But detachment isn't the absence of emotion. It's the refinement of it. It's feeling deeply while remaining unmoved. It's caring without clinging. It's seeing everything while staying centered. When you reach this level of awareness, disappearance becomes a skill, not a reaction. You don't vanish out of fear. You vanish out of strategy. You withdraw to recalibrate, not to escape. You disappear to preserve power, not to punish. And when you return, you do so with new gravity, calm, composed, unreadable. You've learned that control doesn't come from holding on, but from letting go at the right moment. You've learned that not every ending is a wound, some are windows. You've learned that what disappears is often protecting you from versions of yourself that no longer fit your destiny. In that realization, grief transforms into gratitude. You thank what left for showing you your strength. You thank the silence for deepening your sight. You thank the void for teaching you how to see beyond form. That's the level of consciousness where peace becomes unshakable. Because now you know, everything that disappears leaves a trace. Every absence carries a message. Every loss refines perception. You start to navigate life differently, not from fear of losing, but from awareness of flow. You realize that nothing is truly gone. It simply changes the way it exists in your life. Sometimes it moves from physical to emotional, from visible to invisible, from outer to inner. The form fades, but the essence remains. That's why disappearance is not death. It's migration. A migration of meaning from the external to the internal. The world loses sight of it, but you carry it within you. You become the archive of what once was, transformed, distilled, evolved. That's why wise people don't chase what leaves. They integrate it. They transmute it into understanding. Every disappearance is raw material for wisdom. You can let it harden you, or you can let it polish you. The choice defines whether you become bitter or enlightened, but the principle stays the same. Not everything that disappears is lost. There's a kind of peace that comes only after disappearance has done its work. The peace of no longer chasing, no longer needing, no longer fearing. It's the peace of someone who has learned that life doesn't owe explanations, only experiences. That everything and everyone who enters your life carries a specific frequency. And when that frequency no longer resonates, disappearance is the only honest outcome. You stop interpreting it as punishment and start recognizing it as synchronization. You no longer mourn what fades, you observe it. You no longer fight endings, you let them unfold. That calm acceptance is not apathy, it's mastery. The immature mind confuses stillness with emptiness, but stillness is actually fullness without dependence. It's the point where you stop leaking energy toward what resists you and start investing it into what refines you. You realize that chasing what's gone is a form of self-abandonment. Every time you beg for something to stay, you are telling the universe that you don't trust yourself to live without it. But the truth is you can. You always have. The fear of disappearance is an illusion taught by attachment, the belief that your value decreases when something leaves you. But disappearance doesn't shrink you. It reveals your real size. It shows you how much of your strength was borrowed and how much was yours all along. You begin to see how temporary everything is: love, opportunity, identity, status, and instead of feeling terrified, you feel liberated. Because now you understand that impermanence isn't a threat to meaning, it's the source of it. Everything matters precisely because it can disappear. Every moment becomes sacred when you know it's fleeting. This is how power softens into wisdom, through the acceptance of impermanence. The wise don't cling to form, they align with flow. They don't ask for things to last forever. They ask to remain lucid enough to appreciate them while they last. And when disappearance comes, they bow to it like a teacher returning to test what's been learned. What remains after the test is never fragile. It's forged. It's the kind of strength that doesn't need to be displayed because it's now part of your nature. That's when you become dangerous. Not because you control others, but because nothing controls you. Not because you are immune to loss, but because loss no longer defines you. You've learned that absence can't hurt what no longer depends on presence. You've learned that silence can't unsettle what has already made peace with solitude. You've learned that disappearance doesn't end what's real, it simply removes what's not. In that awareness, you finally become untouchable. You stop asking people to stay. You stop explaining your worth. You stop negotiating your peace. You stop seeking closure in places that thrive on chaos. You walk away quietly, without announcement, without resentment, without performance. Because when you truly understand disappearance, you embody it. You let things fade naturally, knowing that what's aligned will always remain connected, and what's not will dissolve no matter how tightly you hold it. You stop chasing permanence and start cultivating presence. You no longer live to preserve but to participate. You live fully, knowing that everything is temporary, but nothing is wasted. Every encounter, every silence, every ending leaves a subtle imprint that continues to shape you long after it's gone. The people who left are still teaching you even now, through the echo of their absence. The moments that vanished are still alive inside your perception, whispering lessons about patience, surrender, humility. You carry entire universes of disappeared things inside you, and yet you are not broken, you are vast. That's the hidden miracle of disappearance. It doesn't take from you, it expands you. It forces you to hold more space, to develop more depth, to see beyond what's visible. You become a quiet force, detached, grounded, unshaken. Others sense it in your energy. They can feel that you've been tempered by silence, that you no longer react, that you don't chase validation. You've learned to disappear from drama, from chaos, from noise, from the need to explain yourself. You've mastered invisibility without losing presence. And that's the highest form of power, to exist without performing, to influence without effort, to move without being seen. Because when you no longer fear disappearance, you become one with it. You move through life like a shadow that knows the sun always returns. You no longer cling to light because you understand darkness is part of the rhythm. You no longer mourn endings because you know they are disguised beginnings. You no longer resist silence because you've learned it speaks a language louder than words. The moment you embrace this truth, peace stops being something you search for and becomes something you are. You are no longer waiting for things to return because you have already returned to yourself. And that's the ultimate realization. Not everything that disappears is lost. Some things vanish to lead you home. Some people fade so you can finally see yourself clearly. Some silences stretch out so you can finally hear your own mind. What disappears clears the space for what was always meant to be yours, not in possession but in understanding. You realize you never truly lose anything aligned with your evolution. It either stays, transforms, or returns in a higher form. That's the quiet law of the universe. Nothing real is ever lost, only translated. The form changes, but the essence remains. The love turns into wisdom, the pain turns into strength, the silence turns into clarity, the absence turns into self. And as you stand in that awareness, alone, still, complete, you understand what real power feels like. It doesn't come from what you hold. It comes from what you can release without fear. That's when you finally see the truth. Disappearance was never your enemy. It was your initiation. It was the invisible ritual that stripped away everything false so that the real could finally emerge. And now, after everything that has vanished, you stand here, quieter, stronger, wiser. You've learned to trust the rhythm of loss. You've learned to honor what ends. You've learned to disappear when necessary, because not everything that disappears is lost. Some things disappear to find their way back, not to the world but to you. And if this truth resonates, it's because you've already begun to wake up. Subscribe because real power doesn't shout, it whispers.